Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to all of you, and particularly those who are new to Shofar Church. I'm definitely going to pray for myself before I do this. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. Father, thank you for another day to worship you, and thank you for all of the people who've gathered here this morning. And I pray this morning, Lord, as we consider the subject of the crucifixion of your Son, that it might pierce our own hearts. I pray that you'd help me finish this sermon, and that today would be a day of reflection and consideration for all of us as we consider what happened 2,000 years ago. In Jesus' name, amen. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. I'm going to begin this morning by handing you around, because I'm not going to get a chance to share this, but you need to get some sense of this. These were nails I forged on Tuesday morning with some friends of mine. We know what the nails were like because we're going to show you later. We have archaeological remains with some of these still stuck in people's ankles. So we know how they were pinned, okay? So I'm going to pass them around to you. You can hold them and feel them, okay? You want to get some sense of what this is like, then I'm going to pass this around there. I want them back at the end because I'm going to use them. Just pass them around as I'm giving my sermon. Get them, feel them. By the way, just hold this. If it was put through you, it was put through here, through your wrist bones. Okay. That's where it was put through there. We're going to talk about that this morning. All right, here we go. We are here this morning to study the first half of the greatest event in the history of mankind. If Jesus Christ of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate and raised from the dead, then Christianity is true, and anything opposed to it is false. At the very epicenter of Christianity lies this event, which happened nearly 2,000 years ago. Christianity centers itself around this event that we're going to talk about today and on Sunday. Christianity is not a way of life. It is a response to the knowledge of the things of which I'm going to speak today and on Sunday. If this event is true, then regardless of what you think about it, how you feel about it, whether you are indifferent to it or not, it remains true and it ought to be believed for every person and for every life. All of history will hinge on this event. All judgment will follow from this event. All nations will bend their knee, willing or unwilling, to this event. All men will confess or reject concerning Christ with respect to this event. There is no more important subject that any of you can concern yourself with than what we're going to talk about today and on Sunday. It is the fullest revelation of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the fullest expression of the only true God. Now, you might say, I use the word there, if. So let us have something to say first to the skeptics then, because maybe the skeptics are going, well, I'm not so convinced then. So let's dive in and let's deal with any skepticism. And maybe you as a Christian have some skepticism in your hearts. What do the skeptics typically say? Well, this is what you get in common culture today. The Bible is a compendium of fireside tales and fables recounted orally for a generation by goat herders and primitive tribes from the Stone Age, until writing was invented, and then many different sources, transliterations, and versions were copied and written down. The Bible was created during a time when stories were verbally passed down over hundreds of years. Stories constantly morphed and changed over time. The Bible is a collection of these. The New Testament is also hearsay, since in these letters, Gospels, the stories were written by the loyal faithful, the camp followers, not by objective historians at that particular time, or by any contemporary writers, and these tales were written many years after the supposed events of this mythical Jesus. This is the kind of stuff which I deal with on a daily basis at the universities that you find everywhere in the culture and on the internet. Okay? There is essentially very little evidence of Jesus in real documented history. A couple of spurious Roman reports, All the rest anecdotal. But more importantly, Jesus' existence is not an issue. Jesus is irrelevant without a God. Then there are many stories, but not all, as many were chosen. There are more than just 4 Gospels, but only these 4 were agreed upon. Were compiled for one self-absorbed convert, Roman emperor in his Nicene Council, for his express purpose of conquest and control of the people of Europe for his Holy Roman Empire. He recognized that this was the perfect religion, mythology for the future domination of the populaces. Half of the stories were ignored by the Nicene bishops, and none have proven to be based on fact. The Bible book is backed up by absolutely no facts, no evidence. It is not proof of any God. The fables are intertwined with historical places and people. And he carries on. It is a historical novel only. This is what you get. This also affects many Christians. It's what turns them into becoming liberal Christians, because they acquiesce to this. Well, let's see if there's any merit to that. Because when we start to deal with the skeptics, it's true. The Bible makes many claims. But if it's lying, it shouldn't be believed. But if it's true, it's of eternal consequence. I have another book next to the Bible there, Josephus. This is how we're going to deal with our skeptics now. Because when people say that Bible was written down by primitive goat herders, that's false. These people certainly weren't primitive or backwards. They had writing long before the time of Jesus. That's just historically ignorant. Okay, you're a fool. You need to go and do some homework if you think that. There's no such thing as a mythical Jesus. Jesus is confirmed in many historic sources, one of which is Josephus. Here's my copy. Alongside the Bible, you can read the book of Josephus, for in it you come across many of the historical figures in the New Testament. You can read about them in here. In fact, there's a lot more interesting stuff to be read in Josephus about some of these people. This is like you when you go to the store and you see those magazines that give you all the latest on Hollywood and all the celebrities, and he married her and she married him and she did this and they all had a divorce and then a big party. That's in here. And then, of course, we've got external evidence like this. What do you do with archaeology? Here's a stone found in 1961, commemorating the building of some structure. Who's it to? Pontius Pilate, the man who had Jesus crucified. The Pilate stone, discovered in 1961. It mentions him as the prefect of the province of Judea. So why do we have this sneaky disposition? You heard that there from our skeptical friend. You know, Constantine conspired and all these people wrote up this story to manipulate you and coerce you and twist you up and use it for their purpose. It's because all of us have been subject to what is called the hermeneutics of suspicion. What is that? This is a great observation by a philosopher by the name of Paul Ricoeur. Okay? And it comes from these cats. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of them. Okay? And his philosophy advocated that basically we all have our own perspectives. He's the father of your modern day lived experience, comes from Nietzsche. This is the philosophy that they teach at our universities, despite what they say about decolonization, by the way. But he also had a contemptuous attitude for Christianity. He said this, I'm going to quote him: Christianity is the greatest misfortune to befall mankind. That's from his subtly titled book called The Antichrist. Yeah. No, he had complete contempt. He thought that the Jews had invented the Bible to serve their own purposes, and then the Christians came along and completed the job for manipulation and coercion. Karl Marx had the same skeptical, suspicious attitude. He always got some agenda because he was trying to liberate everybody from the other ideas that are out there that he think oppressed those people to his Marxism. He was also a hermeneutics of suspicion guy. He believed that religion was like an opium. It dulled your faculty. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. What does opium do to you? It dulls your faculties. It makes you in a kind of drugged up. Well, religion does the same to other people. It makes you in a kind of intellectual and stupor, and so then you're vulnerable to being exploited by your leaders and your other people, and that's what Christianity is all about. It's about keeping people in this kind of drugged up psychological state. But don't worry, Karl Marx is going to come along with his buddies, and they're going to liberate you, because they're going to move you from false consciousness to critical consciousness, and you're going to go and learn critical theory at the universities and get fed a whole ton of Karl Marx. That's the culture we're living in, folks. I know it only too well. Add to our other hermeneutics, Sigmund Freud, who believed that religion is a psychological delusion. It's a projection of the mind. You make up this idea of God in your mind, and this idea of the cross and Jesus is your other higher self to which you're trying to move towards so that you can cope with the realities of life. Both Karl Marx and Freud's ideas of religion come from Ludwig Feuerbach, a Hegelian scholar who came up with this notion that God is a projection of the mind. You caught that from our skeptical friend there. So Constantine using religion as a power play to keep the brothers and the sisters down so he can exercise great power over all of them. Because this is all written by goat herders with absolutely no evidence, apparently. Well, let's test that just briefly. Let's test that briefly. What do we have here? Well, the Bible talks about places, people, and events. If they didn't exist and they're not there, then certainly it's myth. But if they did, then it's couched in real history. And the Bible you read is couched in real history, from Genesis all the way to the end. So yeah, we have this discovered now. We're going to study the Gospel of John. We are in John chapter 8, I believe. We're going into John chapter 9 shortly. And there was an event that happened there where a blind man was healed at the pool of Siloam. Well, they didn't know where it was, and then they found it. Okay? Originally, there was a church that thought that they had built it over this pool, okay? It was attached to Hezekiah's tunnel, okay, because there's a pool, so you wonder, well, where does the water come from? Because it's pretty dry looking there where those people are standing. But it was originally attached to this thing called Hezekiah's tunnel. We're going to look at that. During sewage works in Jerusalem in 2004, that's not too long ago, engineers stumbled upon a series of steps of the first century ritual pool near the mouth of Hezekiah's tunnel. By the summer of 2005, archaeologists said it was without doubt the missing pool of Siloam. In the plaster of this pool were found coins that established the date of this pool to the years before and after Jesus. They found coins in there. Isn't that cool? Goat herders. No evidence, apparently. No evidence. Let us connect the New Testament with the Old Testament. Here is Hezekiah's tunnel. How do we know it's there? Because you can go to Jerusalem and walk through it on a tour. There it is. And we can read about this in 2 Kings. It talks about the rest of the deeds of Hezekiah and all of his might and how he made the pool, there it is, and the conduit, and brought water into the city. Now, why on earth would you want to do that? Why do you need to dig a tunnel to bring water into the city? Why would you need to do that all of a sudden? Because of this thing. What is this? This is the Taylor prism in the British Museum. What is this little six-sided clay device chronicle? It's a historical record. In the old days, back in the time of the Assyrian kings, this is how they would capture their history. It's strange, but nevertheless, there it is. It's in the British Museum. I've seen this. It's kind of written like a millie. As the pips go around, it cycles down. Then they write around like that now. And on this, we have history in which it mentions Hezekiah. And it mentions all the other cities that Sennacherib destroyed in northern Israel, all the way down into southern Israel, to the eventual destruction of all the cities, including Lachish. Okay? All except for one. Jerusalem. He never conquered Jerusalem. And that's the biblical one. He said, I tied Hezekiah up like a bird, but no defeat. By the way, how do we know it's Hezekiah's tunnel? Because, you know, when we make a building and then we put a commemorating plaque on the side of the wall and say, some Stoffel van der Merwe built this sports stadium in 1956. They did that then. There actually was a plaque in the cave which was discovered commemorating that this was the building of Hezekiah's tunnel. Some kid found it. He was swimming somewhere and came across this thing. It's in a museum in Turkey. So we're pretty sure it's Hezekiah's tunnel. Okay. Now, this is my favorite piece of archaeology. Apparently, no evidence. Did we see, what did our skeptics say? No evidence whatsoever. Ancient people who didn't know how to write, just conjuring up, mythical. Does this sound like myth to you? This is my favorite now. Now, that's difficult to see now. What is that thing over there? You just see a brown stripe up there in the wall. But this is the event in 2 Kings. Hezekiah is under pressure. Sennacherib is destroying. The Assyrians were wicked people, man. They were the first people we know of who had a professional army. We know from archaeological finds that they were desperately wicked. They used to do terrible things to people. They used to take babies by their ankles and hold them by their ankles and then beat them to death like that. Yeah. So when these guys are coming to town, you might be a little bit anxious because nobody could stop them. In fact, this is the jesting where the king sends his spokesman. They're mocking the Jews. Says, you're going to die up there drinking your own urine in there and eating your own excrement. Yeah. Nobody's going to stop us. And Hezekiah has a moment of fear, and he tries to buy the king off, and the king takes all his money and says, I'm still coming to get you. And then he has a moment of repentance. He's listening to Isaiah the prophet, okay? And then he trusts God. And then Sennacherib loses big time. Overnight, 185,000 men that he had there killed by an angel. Game over, Sennacherib. Go back home. And that was the end of the Assyrian Empire for the most part. Wow. And you can go into the British Museum and see this thing. It is huge. You see, there's those ropes there. Those things are like at the airport that you walk next to. This thing is as high as this wall here. Goes around the whole room like that. It was a commemorative plaque on which he celebrated his great victory. But on this one, they celebrated the war over the city of Lachish, which was to the south of Jerusalem. How do we know that? Because in the cuneiform on the right-hand side, they tell you. You can open your Bible and read this event alongside this thing. And you can see in it the archers and the slingers. The Jews fighting back desperately on the top of the castle. The siege machines. This is all chronicled. Apparently there's no evidence. Ancient goat herders who couldn't write? I think not. So yeah, we have it then. Let's go back in time now. Now I want to plunge you back to 2,000 years about from today. And we find ourselves in Jerusalem. I want you to get some sense of what is going on or what was happening back then. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. Now, that's not going to do much for your spiritual journey, really. You don't read that in the morning and go, "Oh, Lord, I feel lifted up in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar." That's not the point. Luke is the historian of the New Testament. What is he giving you there? He's giving you a date. He is mentioning people. If those people never existed and weren't real, then the Bible is a lie. But all of these people existed. We know them. You can go read about them in Josephus and many other works. And we're introduced to all of these people. But then the skeptic might say to you, oh, hang on a sec, there's 2 high priests. And we know from the Jewish law that there's only ever 1 high priest. You go, that is true. So why is there 2 then? We don't know. Unless, of course, you read Josephus, because he tells you why. In his book, Antiquities, he says this. Tiberius sent Gratus to be procurator of Judea. This man deprived Annas of the high priesthood and appointed Ismail. Joseph, called Caiaphas, was made his successor. When Gratus had done these things, he went back to Rome, having tarried in Judea 11 years, and Pontius Pilate came as his successor. So why are there 2 high priests? Because the Romans didn't like Annas. And when the Romans tell you you have another high priest, what do you have? You have 2, regardless of what your law says. Why? Because they said so. And as you're going to find out a little bit later on, when the Romans say, we say so, it be so. It will be so. So the Bible's not got a problem there. The Bible is just consistent with the historical records that we have. Now our passage this morning, open your Bible or your devices. Let's go to Matthew chapter 26. You're going to keep your Bibles open now. We're going to look at this passage. We're going to do a lot of reading this morning. There's some awesome stuff here. Matthew 26, verses 6 to 29. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when they had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Here we find the build-up, the Passion Week. By the way, passion does not mean Jesus was having fun. Classically understood, the passion actually just means suffering. It's called the Suffering Week, the week of suffering. Here we have the beginning of this, and we have the inauguration of communion, which we're going to have on Sunday. Okay? We have the inauguration of this. What's interesting about the Bible is we have 4 gospel accounts, which is 4 independent eyewitness testimonies. And it's good for you to read all of them in one sitting and read them alongside each other, because you will see they catch certain things that others don't necessarily include. And that's what we expect from eyewitness testimony. If my brother and I, what's your name, sir? Sorry? Ora. Ora and I, shake my hand, Ora. Okay, so we are standing on the side of the street here, and my friend Peter van Niekerk, where's Peter? Where's he sitting? Where is he? Yeah, Peter's, he's driving his souped-up new 4-wheel drive up the road here like the students, and he swerves off the road, and he hits one of these trees here, and we're witnesses to it, and we give an account, okay? You might say, well, he was driving a Toyota Hilux because he's a Hilux guy, and, it was the color red, and, Peter kind of fell out of the door, and his wife was driving past in that direction, and she said, what are you doing? And they had an argument in the street, and my account was I didn't pay attention to the fact that it was a Toyota. As I said, it was a car, but there was a woodworking machine on the back that fell off. And I said, and there was a woodworking machine that fell off the back of the thing, because I'm a woodworker, so I'm going to pay attention to that, whereas you're not going to know what a woodworking machine looks like or what it is. That's normal eyewitness testimony. We find the same in the Gospels. So what's really cool, for example, Jesus sweats blood. We're going to talk about that just now. Which gospel includes that? Why? Because he's a doctor. That seems to make sense, eh? But more observant about a person's physiological condition. Isn't that interesting? Wow, interesting, hey? Reading on. Then Jesus said to them, this very night you will fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. This is very important, because Jesus is here beginning to terrify these men. And so the terror for them is going to begin within a few hours. But notice he's quoting here from the Old Testament. This is very important, because the reason why he's there is because of the Old Testament and the prophecies concerning. He's quoting from Zechariah. Then what we see is the response from the disciples. Let's listen to Peter now. Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Truly I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. We often don't remember that. It wasn't just Peter who made that claim. They all said they weren't going to desert Jesus. This is also recorded in Mark. Now, this is going to be a moment of anxiety for the disciples, because they have in their mind what they think Jesus is going to do, and then there's what Jesus is actually going to do. And now he's disrupted their safe space. You will be scattered. No, we won't. We're men of courage. Yeah, right. Now, let's go deeper. There were 3 major authorities at this time of Jesus and the disciples: the Romans, the Herodians, and the Sanhedrin. We need to understand something about all 3 of these systems of authority, because all 3 of them had power and all 3 of them were wicked. Jesus got the trifecta of wickedness. Beginning with the Romans, extreme power, ruled by competence. They knew how to run a place. I've seen the Colosseum and I've seen the aqueducts in Rome. Those things are 2,000 years old, still bringing fresh water into that city. We can't even keep our pipes fixed for 10 years here in Potch. Hey? They got buildings that have been standing there for 2,000 years. Power and competence, and a military to enforce it. You want to mess with the Roman legions? Heavy taxation to run this empire, because you've got to build all kinds of stuff, road networks, etc., etc., etc. Now, when they want to make a point, because people aren't behaving in their empire, how do they make a point to the people to get you to know that you ought to behave yourself? They have a special thing that they do to people, which they borrowed some historians say from the Carthaginians, of crucifying you. It was a public event for an express purpose of hanging you on a cross, like a sign outside there on the road that everybody drives past, so you can be told how to behave. And if you don't behave, or we catch you up to something, you go up there on the cross. And they would even have a sign for you as well. They would make these and tell you, why on earth is that guy up there? They didn't just put you on a cross, because then people go, what's he up there for? They all had a sign to carry to the cross, all of them. I'm up here because of whatever it was. They were always on their guard against sedition and insurrection, because also with this power, the local people want to rebel, etc., etc. And so what is sedition? Sedition is the act of inciting revolt, insurrection, or resistance against established government authority to speech, either in speech, writing, or behavior. If they got wind of this from you, man, you were in for a rough day. You know. How about the Herodians? The Herodians have a Phoenician ancestry. Now, this was a rather unpleasant crowd as well. They're not somebody who you want as neighbors. You certainly wouldn't want to leave your kids with these guys. Okay. Herod the Great ruled from about 40 years before Jesus, up until Jesus was born. And we know about him in the New Testament because he did a number of things, including having the first genocide we know that happened after Jesus' birth. Threatened by the prospects of this king who was apparently born, he sent his guys down there, his own soldiers down there, because this is, the Herodians also had their own soldiers. They fought alongside the Romans. So the Romans had a fist to enforce the law, but so did the Herodians. You didn't misbehave around these guys. They had their own crew to come and fix you. He had his first wife murdered and some of his sons strangled to death. Nice father. Herod the Great. Herod the not so great. Yeah. He had sons, 3 sons after him who ruled in the area of modern-day Israel. The area in the south, Judea, was Herod Archelaus. He was so bad that the Romans kicked him out and banished him to France for his brutality. So that's why you end up with Pontius Pilate being there, because they couldn't find a Herodian to govern that region, and that's why he's there at the time. To the north of that, we have Galilee. We had Herod Antipas, okay? He was also an unpleasant person. We know he was involved with the death of John the Baptist. And to the north of that, Philip. These were the sons of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas' son, Herod Agrippa, was the one who had James, the disciple, killed. Not nice people. Powerful, in collusion with the Romans. That relationship began when Herod the Great had supported, to begin with, Mark Antony when the Roman Empire was having its own internal struggle, and eventually Mark Antony, who was the boyfriend of Cleopatra, they had a fight with Caesar Augustus, Octavian. And ultimately what happened is Herod decided he was going to support Octavian in the war, and Octavian was on the winning side, which is why he's kind of good in the eyes of the Romans, because he picked the right team. So they were appointed there, and they had certain rules and responsibilities. They also rebuilt all the temple and a whole bunch of other things as well. All right? And they had their own army. They also conspired with the Pharisees to kill Jesus. We know this from Mark 3:6. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against how to destroy him. Then we have the Sanhedrin. Who are the Sanhedrin? These are the Jewish lads now, of Jewish ancestry, and they were a group of elders, about 70 of them. We know this, it goes back to Moses' time and the appointment of elders. And so this system had been around for a while. And they were responsible for a lot of religious authority and various civil responsibilities, chief amongst which was they governed the temple. And all of the events that the Jewish people would participate in, their sacrifices, etc., they governed that whole thing. And they ran it, and they were corrupt. The Sanhedrin was made up of 2 groups of people, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees were these Jewish guys, but they were much more secular, okay? Whereas the Pharisees were more religious guys. And so the Sadducees were very partial to the Romans and keeping themselves in position. So about 80% of the Sanhedrin was made up of Sadducees. The Pharisees were held in higher esteem by the people. They were the religious authorities. What's important, though, is they also had laws, and they also had a temple guard. So they also had soldiers. So every single team had a team of soldiers to do their bidding. And they, too, could carry out laws. And often they would punish people. They just had to draw the line at capital punishment. The Romans said to him, you can't do that. Which is interesting, because we find that Stephen's case, he gets killed. There's a mob kind of behavior there. The Jews would kill people either by stoning them, burning them, or beheading them. The Romans, they crucified you because they wanted it to make it last up to a week. The people we know, there are accounts of people who hung on a cross for about a week. Yeah, their notice board for a week. All right. And the scribes were also there. They mentioned as well, these were people who were underneath the leadership of the Pharisees, and they were the people who had the responsibility for writing down the scriptures. You know, those illiterate goat herders. Yeah, apparently. All right. So we're back here then. Now I've already introduced you to all these people, and here we find them all in that opening statement. We find the Roman power there, Tiberius Caesar, then Pontius Pilate. Then we find the two sons of Herod, Herod the Tetrarch in Galilee, and his brother Philip. And then we find the two high priests. So there you have the three authority systems, but some more details added to that. Then alongside that, because you had this situation, people were not happy because of taxation and oppression and corruption and all the rest of it. And so then there were people who were saying, I don't want any more of this. And those were the zealots. These are the revolutionaries back then who wanted to overthrow the system. The whole lot. They were people who were armed resistance. These are guys who were prepared to carry daggers under their dress. And then when a Roman soldier was not paying attention, they might pull you into an alley and knife you with a knife called a sicari. We know this from Josephus' work. One of Jesus' disciples, Simon the Zealot, is one of these guys. He's a revolutionary. He wants political power. He wants to overthrow the system. We know that there were others who were trying to do this. Judas of Galilee, mentioned in Acts chapter 5, had led a revolt that had failed. But this goes back for years and years and years, because 200 years before Christ, 168, round about that time, there had been the Maccabean revolt. So the Jews still celebrate Hanukkah today from that revolt. But it eventually got quashed out and the Romans took over. And it's not the end of it, folks. Not even the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD is the end of this. Because in 135, we find that there's another revolt by Simon Bar Kokhba. Okay, in 135. So this continued even beyond the destruction. There was always this folks getting together, forming a crew and deciding to stand up and fight against them. It's Emperor Hadrian who really is the one who fulfills Jesus' description of the destruction of the temple, because whilst the temple was burned in 70 AD, it wasn't taken apart. The Jews continued to practice their sacrifices all the way up until 135, and then Hadrian said to them, right, I'm done with this crowd. It's over now. You go into Jerusalem, take that building apart block by block and throw it off there. That's why if you go to Jerusalem today, it's just a flat slab there. Like if we took this church down, all that would be left would be the slab. The Muslims have built a mosque on there a couple 100 years ago. And all the rocks of the temple were thrown into the valley. And then he said to them as well, Hadrian said this to the Jews, if any Jew is found within eyeshot of Jerusalem, which means if you were here standing, you can see Jerusalem, you execute them. So no Jews in Jerusalem. They all had to leave that whole area. That was when the prophecy that Jesus spoke of in the Olivet Discourse is fulfilled, in my estimation. Now, just to compound this now, if you're getting a feeling for this now, on top of all of this, there's messianic expectation. So the zealots might be thinking to themselves, maybe we're around about time now. Now, what is this all about then? Okay, because there's the plans of men and the schemes of men, and then God's got a plan in the midst of all of this chaos. And his began a long way ago in the Old Testament when he spoke about the coming of the Messiah. And this intensifies the situation. There's a lot of messianic expectation at the time. And this is fueled by prophecies in the Old Testament concerning the coming of Messiah. Concerning both the identity but also the works of Messiah. Because they're told not only who he will be, but what he will do. In addition to this, you've got certain covenants that God had made with the people. And these were unconditional covenants, which means they're going to happen. You put those things together and you have an explosive situation at the time of Jesus. Here are some of the covenants, the unconditional covenants, the Abrahamic covenant. Very important. What does it say? I will establish my covenant between me and your offspring and that for generations. And everlasting covenant, which means it will be. He says the same to David in 2 Samuel 7, when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I'll raise up your offspring for you. You shall come with your body, and I will establish his kingdom and shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne and his kingdom forever. Which is, if God exists, there will always be a Davidic kingdom. For how long? Forever. Everlasting all the time. Sustained by God. But, just to make things even worse, there was this covenant given in Jeremiah 31. Now you can imagine they're all familiar with these covenants, and then they get told, no, there's also a new covenant coming from Jeremiah. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, declares the Lord, I'll put my law within them, and I'll write it on their hearts, and I will be God, and they shall be my people. And they shall no longer each one teach his neighbor and each brother, saying, know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. Imagine that. So imagine if you're a zealot now or somebody, and you've got these covenants, but then you also are aware of this, that there's a Messiah coming, Isaiah 9. And we're told that he will come and he will begin his work in Galilee of the nations. Ooh. Here we go. And there will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. In the former time, he brought me into content, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone. Man, what words of hope. Light coming to the darkness. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of the peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and righteousness. You see the connection here between this messianic prophecy and the covenant, stitched in together, woven together. But it gets even more concerning. Isaiah 53, which I am definitely not going to read because I will not finish here today for you. Okay? So I'm not going to read that passage. What I am going to do is I'm going to refer to these other ones now. Now, I'm just giving you a little sprinkling dust here of all of these messages. There is so much more depth here than I can possibly fathom and do justice to in the time that I have. Now, interestingly enough, John is having doubts because John the Baptist finds himself in prison, and he's wondering, well, is this Messiah going to show up or what? We're told that the Messiah is going to come. We know he's going to be this power. He's going to do all these things. In fact, it says he was going to end war. Maybe he can end this Roman thing. And Jesus sends notice to him. Now, when John heard in prison the deeds of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Jesus answered him, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up. And the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is one who is not offended by me. And then, if you look at those verses, you realize that Jesus is driving John's attention back to the book of Isaiah, to Isaiah 61 and Isaiah 35. Be strong. Fear not, John. Behold, your God will come. We're not done yet with prophecies. I might be done, but we're not done. There it is. The psalm as well. This is the most quoted Old Testament passage in the entire New Testament. You should go read it. Psalm 110. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter. Rule in the midst of your enemies. Gosh, isn't that awesome? Just power in the midst of the darkness. Man, I want to be on that team. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments. And it gets worse, because this prophecy isn't vague. Because God is the God of the Bible, and the Bible isn't vague. It's what makes Christianity unique amongst all religions. There is no other religious text out there. The Quran, the Vedas, nothing else. No other piece of literature that's like the Bible in this respect. The Bible is a prophetic text. What do I mean by that? 30% of the Bible is prophetic, which means it speaks of the future, of things that will come to be. Only one being can do that. And even the atheist and the skeptic would probably conclude that that would have to be God. And yet that's what God does. If you go and read Isaiah chapter 40 to 44, you have the great war between God and the gods of this world. And he says, you go and cut that stump down there, on which you carve it into an idol and worship that dumb thing, and then you go and braai on it afterwards. That's what he basically says. I am not that God. He says, I have said before what will happen, and it shall come to pass, and it came to pass. And he is specific. Not vague like Nostradamus, naming people and places. Cyrus is my servant. Way before his hand. There was no such thing as crucifixion at the time of Isaiah. How could he know his hands would be pierced? Go back to Genesis, that the snake will pierce his ankle. And on. We could spend the whole month here going through all this stuff. It's what distinguishes the Bible. It's why the Bible is divine. There's nothing else in the world like it. Here we have a timeline. Remember, a timeline had been given to Jeremiah, because Jeremiah had probably the worst job as a prophet of any prophet. But he was told, no, hold on, brother, they're going to be in captivity for 70 years. It's not, oh, well, things are going to kind of get better. No, 70 years and then you're going to come back. Hold out. Be strong. And then we're told, Daniel in his beautiful prayer, oh gosh, I can't even read Daniel's prayer. It just does me in every time. But at the end of that prayer, God honors him and blesses him with this vision. 70 weeks are decreed about your people for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, to the coming of the anointed one. This is the clearest messianic verse in all of the Old Testament, because it uses the word Mashiach. When the Mashiach comes, the anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again. And the moat, and in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, the Mashiach shall be cut off. He will come to his temple at this specific time, and he will be cut off. So we're told, and they knew what these dating were, because they knew when the temple had been rebuilt and all of Jerusalem had been built, so they could do a countdown. So at the time of Jesus, there was messianic expectation. There were people waiting in the temple when Jesus went there as a little boy. We could see it in John the Baptist. The woman that Jesus talks to in John chapter 4. She even seems to hint at it when she says, when he comes. She knew he was coming sometime. And we knew it was about this time now. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Around about that time. And alongside Daniel, just to further make sure that you can see this, we see this prophecy. And I saw in the night vision, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there come one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him. And to him was given a dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and a kingdom that shall not be destroyed. You see the covenant there again? Which title does Jesus use of himself more than any other in the New Testament? Son of Man. He's constantly saying to them. In fact, in Matthew 16, he says to them, who do people say the Son of Man is? And some say this, and some say that, and some say Elijah. And then he says to the disciples, who do you say the Son of Man is? And Peter's the one who responds and says, you, Lord, you are the Messiah. And Jesus blesses him. Blessed are you, Simon, for saying that. That's what the account in Matthew 16. And then what's interesting is Jesus then prophesies he's going to Jerusalem to be crucified and raised. And then Peter steps in and says, no, that's not going to happen. And then what does Jesus do? That's where we get the get behind me, Satan rebuke. You know, I'm familiar with that. My wife uses it on me every now and then, you know. Get behind me, Satan. We all heard the rebuke, but nobody knows what it's about. What is it about? Well, Peter had the correct understanding of the identity of who Messiah was, but he was wrong about the works of Messiah. He didn't like what Jesus was saying. So he says, you know what? I'm going to tell you what's going on here. And Jesus says, you get behind me. It's not for Peter to decide what the Messiah is going to do because it's been decreed in the Old Testament. Go and read Isaiah 53 and other places. Let's go to Matthew chapter 26. Here we go. Hold on to your seats. Here we go. The darkness is with us, folks. While he was speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs. This is the temple guard, from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I will kiss is the man. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, greetings, Rabbi. And he kissed him. Jesus said to him, friend, what do you come to do? Do what you came to do. Then they came upon and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said, put your sword back into its place. For all who shall take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled? It must be so. At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out against the robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. And then all the disciples left him and fled. So much for their claim. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered, and Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard to the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards to see the end. The chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death, but they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest stood up and said, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ. That word, in all occasions in the Bible, just means Messiah. In fact, you can have my permission, everywhere there's Christ in your Bible, just write Messiah there. Because sometimes Christ, we forget it's Messiah. That just means Messiah. So he's saying to them, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, you have said so, which is to say, yes, I am. But I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven. What verses has Jesus just quoted from? He's just referenced 2 Old Testament passages. Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Psalm 110. It is perfectly legitimate for you to know your scriptures and to quote the Old Testament and to show this. Why? Jesus is doing it to make the point, to tell people the truth. These things have been declared long ago by God, which means they will come to pass. It doesn't matter what you do, it will come to pass. This is an everlasting covenant. We're told there that the Son of Man will be given all authority and all nations will bend their knee to him. I am that man coming on the clouds of heaven. I am the Son of Man. Look at the response. Then the high priest tore his robes and says, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you? Okay. What's that? What's that contraption? That's called an ossuary. It's a clay box. This one is very finely detailed. When Jewish people would bury people, they would put them in a tomb. They'd dig a hole into a cave, and then they would bench out on the wall like a horizontal place, like a shelf, and you would wrap the body, and you would lay that body horizontally like that, and you would close the tomb. And then you come back after the body decomposed, and you gather the bones, and you put them in an ossuary, and then you would stack those in there. And so the body would be removed, and the next body would be buried there. This is the ossuary. Whose ossuary is it? It was discovered in 1990. How's that? We have the bones of Caiaphas the high priest, folks. We have the bones of the man who crucified Jesus Christ of Nazareth. How do we know it's his? It's because it has his name written on the side. Wow. You know, absolutely no evidence. No evidence whatsoever. Mythical Jesus? I think not. Warning. We are now moving into the crucifixion now. I'm going to be doing some demonstrations up here now of what this looks like. It is going to disturb you. It disturbed me. Okay? I'm warning you now, this needs to be done. And here's why it needs to be done. Because so many of us become so familiar with our faith that we forget what went on that day and what it cost him. So I hope that this morning, once we do the sign act, you will never forget it. And every time you have communion and you hear that my body was broken for you and my blood was shed for you, you're going to have a clear image of what that's about. Okay. The death of the Messiah. These are the things that happened to him. Mental anguish. He's first beaten by the temple guard. He has a crown of thorns placed on his head. He's then beaten by the Roman guard in a variety of different kinds of ways. And he's scourged, and ultimately he's crucified. We're going to look at all of those. Let's begin. Mental anguish. Jesus is well aware of what is going on. Jesus would have been familiar with crucifixion because he would have seen people who had been crucified in Jerusalem. The Romans were not slow to do this. In the time of the Jewish wars, in the 70 AD, they were crucifying 500 people a day. These guys knew how to torture you and make a statement out of you. Okay. So he was aware what was going to come his way. He had seen people hanging on the cross there, sometimes for a week. They would let you hang on a cross, sometimes, keep you alive, so that the vultures would still be eating you whilst you're alive. And there's nothing you could do because your hands are pinned and your legs are pinned. So that vulture sits on the horizontal piece and eats your face out. The dogs would start to eat you from the bottom. Jesus is having extreme mental anguish. We know from Luke, the physician. This is in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's betrayed. He goes to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And we basically said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew with them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, Father, if you're willing, remove this cup. And an angel appeared to him and gave him some strength, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat became like great drops of blood. God, that's really weird. It's really weird, but it happens. It's called hematidrosis. We know of a number of people who have suffered from this. Stop bleeding from your skin. It's very rare, but we know of medical accounts. This is a young girl who suffers from it. I don't have time to talk about this. Most of my work and research has been done through this book. A good friend of mine, Dr. Joe Bergeron, who wrote this book on the crucifixion, he's also a medical doctor. So he talks about this in detail. I'm really indebted to him. I know him. I've been on WhatsApp with him. You can imagine my whole week I've been doing all this research, and I've got like one of the experts in the world on this, and I'm asking questions in the whole time. It's been an amazing experience for me. At times, difficult. Okay. So he knows that this is potentially what is happening now, that he is suffering from this. Okay. Jesus had the kind of hematidrosis which comes on when people are aware that they're going to die. It's a single episode kind of hematidrosis. It's extremely rare, but we suspect that that's what happened to him. So huge anxiety, massive stress, well aware of what's going to happen. Not only is this crucifixion going to happen to him, but he's going to be separated from the Father. Now, I'm not even sure how to fathom what that means. I don't even know where to begin with that. Next, he's beaten by the temple guard. Now, the men who were standing holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They were also blindfolded him and kept asking, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him. So we know a few things from this passage in Luke. Okay? So after he's betrayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, he gets dragged first in front of Annas. Then he goes to Caiaphas, and here's when the beating starts. They would slap him in the face. He was blindfolded. Well, if you're blindfolded, you've got no way to duck or to protect yourself. I've got a friend here. Come here, David. Now, David is a useful guy to use because he's an MM guy, a guy. Now, if you just stand there, I'm going to hit you, but don't flinch, okay? Now, of course, he's going to flinch. And he's probably going to knock me out as well. All right, go sit down. I'm not going to hit a guy who's an MMA guy because he's going to sort me out. But you can just imagine that. You're standing there with blindfolded and guys are just hitting you on the face, slapping you and spitting on you, mocking you. We don't know what time it is, but we speculate that he was with this temple guard of the Sanhedrin for many hours. Bearing in mind they wanted him killed. There's not much detail given here, but I think and I speculate that during that time he was assaulted by these guys a lot. So by the time he arrived at the Romans, he'd been there for a few hours because he goes and he's in front of the Romans early in the morning. It's interesting that they take Jesus early in the morning. And one of the reasons why Dr. Bergeron speculates that they did this is because Jesus came into the Jerusalem and there was a huge crowd. Remember? And they were all singing. And so these Pharisees and Sadducees said, look, we don't want the people who are supporters of him to find out because we might have a riot. So let's do this sneaky now, in the morning when everybody's asleep. We'll have a partisan crowd. We'll raise up a mob. We'll put pressure on the Jews. We'll get the Romans to crucify him because if we do the dirty on him, then this crowd might revolt against us. See how sneaky and how smart that is. Okay, they're going to pass it off on the Romans. Okay. Crown of thorns. Okay. So from there he gets beaten. He gets handed over to Pilate. Now Pilate's interesting because Pilate has some reservations. He thinks that this guy's been framed by these guys. He doesn't believe that Jesus is guilty of anything, and he tries to back out of it. Nevertheless, he's aware of the problems here now, and the last thing he wants is some seditious crowd turning the place over because he's in charge, and then he's in trouble. So he's just want to quieten everything down now, and now he's got a mob of Jewish guys now screaming for this guy's life, okay? And so the soldiers begin to mock him, okay? He has a conversation with Jesus, and then he has Jesus scourged and beaten, I think to try and say to Jews, look, I've done this to this lad, I've punished him. No, but he does deserve death. And so why did they put a crown of thorn on his head? We made one here. This is from, it's a species similar to the one you get in Jerusalem. 'n blink baar, wag ek bietjie doring. And we know, interestingly enough, from the Shroud of Turin, which I'm going to talk about just now, that it was probably more like a cap than a ring. Eesh. This thing's nasty. See that? Look at those. Is this hakkensteek? Wag 'n bietjie. Yeah. This is not what you wear when you go fishing at the Vaal Dam, by the way. Look at that. Now, why would they put this on his head? It's interesting, hey? I mean, this is going to hurt you, but this is really just a game compared to what's coming. This is really, I think, and Dr. Bergeron argues here, he says it's more a way of mocking. And the reason why he argues for that is because in the Roman soldiery and success over other nations, what they would do if you were victor over nations is you'd get a grass crown, also known as the blockade crown, was the rarest and most esteemed military honor in ancient Rome, bestowed exclusively upon a commander who liberated a besieged legion or army by breaking the encirclement. Crafted from fresh grass, weeds, and wildflowers plucked directly from the ground where the relief occurred, it symbolized the spontaneous gratitude of the rescued chiefs and invoked ancient agrarian rituals of victory. So they're mocking him. Oh, you're this king of the Jews. You're victorious. He has a hat for you. Put it on. They're mocking him. Now, bearing in mind, if you were Romans now and you believed that this guy was one of the zealots or leading the zealots in an insurrection and potentially had killed some of your buddies or his guys have been killing them, how would you treat him? Not very nicely. Alongside the crown of thorns, this is the Shroud of Turin. This is an amazing thing, this. There's huge debate as to whether it's Jesus that was in that or not. I'm not going to get into that. But what we do know from this amazing cloth was it was wrapped around somebody who was crucified. Just like Jesus, he has exactly the same wounds. He has a crown of thorn on his head. We know he's bleeding from the top of his head, which is why we know it's probably a cap like that. Didn't go around the side here. He's bleeding on top of his head. Because all of where he had exit wounds, it's still bled into this garment and it's been preserved in that garment there. We see from his face that his nose was broken. His one eye was swollen. He was probably punched and assaulted in the face. His one shoulder looks to be damaged from potentially carrying the patibulum. Okay? His hands are folded there. You can see it. And you can see on the left-hand wrist, you see that red blood mark? That's where they drove a nail through in there. So he has all the same marks. He is wounded on his feet, and he also has a spear through the side. Exactly the same wounds as Jesus. We don't know if it is Jesus, but we know a lot about crucifixion victims because of this thing. We know the cloth, which is made. It was made back then. It goes all the way back to the time of Jesus. It's an extraordinary thing, this. Go to your Bibles. Get ready. Here we go. When morning came, all the chief priests, now it's early morning now, and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. No doubt Judas may have been moved because Jesus was already beaten up pretty badly then. I don't know. We speculate. Saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is it to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed and went and hanged himself. But the chief priest, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and brought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Reading on, I'm going to pick it up now and then. Now Jesus, verse 11, now Jesus stood before the governor. And the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, you have said so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast of the governor was accustomed to release a crowd from any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had the notorious prisoner called Barabbas. We know from historical sources, I think that Barabbas was a zealot. Okay, so he was due to be crucified. Christ takes his place. Okay. What do you want me to release for you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Messiah? For they knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, he was sitting on the judgment seat. His wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with this Jesus who is called Christ, the Messiah? They all said, let him be crucified. And he said, why? What evil has he done? But they all shouted all the more, let him be crucified. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that the riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands of the crowd, saying, I'm innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. And all the people answered, his blood be on us and our children. Then he released them for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him over to be crucified. Here we find an artwork with Jesus in front of Pilate. Remember, Pilate is not sure. Pilate even sends him to Herod, and then Herod sends him back. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. That's 600 men, by the way. And they strapped him and put him on a scarlet robe on him. This is the mocking, twisting together a crown of thorns, and they put it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. Here's the reed. This is also mocking. It's meant to represent a censer, a scepter. Okay? Put it in his right hand, and kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him, and they led him away to crucify him. Now, this reed I found in Potchefstroom. Arundo donax. There's two reed species that grows in Israel, in modern-day Israel, but this is the main one. The other one's small. This is a giant reed. It grows up to 30 feet. Could grow up as high as this. This is, you know where they're building that new development opposite the rugby fields there? There's a little pile of it there. I saw it there. This is it. What is it like? When this becomes hard, it's like bamboo. Can you confirm, brother? Is that like bamboo to you? Okay. All right. So what are you doing with this thing? What are these Romans doing? Hitting him on the head with this thing. How many times? Who knows? We don't know. They're striking him with this thing. And mocking him. Punching him. But that's tame. Because then they scourged him. This is the device. David, bring your mate. Can you just put these 2 blocks for me over here? This is a wooden handle with leather strops onto which they would fix bits of metal or lead, and they would also put bone in it as well and hooks. This thing was used to hit you mercilessly. There's only one rule. Don't kill you, because you've got to hang on the cross. So I've got to prepare you. I've got to hit you so hard, your lungs are going to separate from your ribs. You're going to end up with water in your lungs. Your lungs might even collapse. Okay? You're going to start bleeding real badly. Okay? The Jews were only allowed to give 39 lashes. You double them up, put them on top of each other. We'll put that one behind. David, put that one behind it. You'd receive 39 lashes. The Romans had no restrictions. How many times? Who knows? Who knows? But if he was leading an army, you thought he was killing your brothers, and you on this thing, what you going to do? You're going to lay into him. The Shroud of Turin We can tell from that guy's back that he got hit real badly. He got hit by a right-handed man and a left-handed man because he's got stripes going down his back at 45 degrees from the left and 45 degrees from the right. Are you left-handed, David? Okay, so what would you do? The man would be strapped to a post. Okay, they had posts for doing this, a scourging post. By the way, I found this out. The Pharisees had their own one. They used to cane people as well. And then the Romans had one as well. And so what you would do is you'd stand opposite the guy. He would probably be standing. Usually he'd be completely naked when they did this to you. And you would start to hit him. And I probably would say, you're not going to stand for much longer. You're going to probably go to your knees pretty quickly. I would say probably in the first blow. Okay. So what you do is you come in with this thing. And that's what you do to them. For how long? We don't know. This thing is wicked, man. Gosh. And I think that's after the beating from the temple guard, and he got that, then Jesus was probably in big trouble with that thing. As anyone would be. Just got to keep you alive because we're not done with you yet. They're pulling out his beard, hit his face, mocking him, and then he's scourged. I love this picture, one of my favorite pieces of art. This is the one where Pilate, having had Jesus scourged, he says, "Behold the man, Ecce homo." It's my favorite piece of artwork. It doesn't show Jesus' back there, but his back would probably be opened from both sides. He's going to have been flogged something else. As they went out, they found a man. Pick this up now, Matthew chapter 27, verse 32. As they went out, they found a man, Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled this man to carry his cross. This is a very interesting thing here. Okay? And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And after his head, and over his head, they put this charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself, if you are the Son of God. Come down from the cross." So also the chief priests and the scribes and elders mocked him. He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Because if he's the Messiah, then what could he do? And he can't. He's up there on the tree. He is King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross. He's a king. He's a Messiah, apparently. Look at him up there. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now if he desires him. For he said, "I am the Son of God." And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. So we come to the cross now. Okay? Now we know. We're going to talk about this. When Jesus was walking from where they scourged him up to Golgotha to be crucified, he didn't carry the T-shaped structure or the cross as depicted in Mel Gibson's thing, because the cross that Jesus was crucified was, in all certainty, this shaped cross, a T-shaped structure. The beam had a name. This is called the stipes, the vertical piece. This piece would be planted in the ground and would stay there permanently in a place of public execution, because once they finished doing that for one guy, they would just take the horizontal piece off the patibulum and do it to the next guy. All right, this timber weighs about 60 pounds, okay, and it was carried across the shoulders, probably not like that, okay, and that's the picture of what the cross would then look like, okay. David, you want to come and help us here now? So you can pick this up. It had a mortise and tenon joint like this. Okay? So how would you carry this if you were going to carry it? Probably like that. That's probably how Jesus carried the cross. And then often, they would carry their sign in the other hand with what they'd been condemned with. So as they're walking through, people would know, this is what you're guilty of. And that's probably what Jesus had to do. But after the scourging, he doesn't make it. And so he collapses on the ground. And Simon of Cyrene has to carry the cross for him. Okay. We can put that back down. Yeah. So that's where I think how the cross was carried. Okay. This is called the patibulum. This is the stipe. Okay. Have you got the nails there, folks? Okay. I think I've got 2 more. There's another one out there. Should be 4. I'm going to need you 2 guys. 3 of you. Jaco, can you come with? Kai. Okay, next was the pinning to the cross. Okay? And how they would pin somebody. Want 2 guys that side? You 2 guys this side. Come on, boy. Just hold this. He's probably put on the cross like this. Arms up onto this position here. Like that. Okay. All right. And then as I said earlier on, if you take your pinky and you extend your pinky up as far as it goes, that's where they would drive the nail through. They wouldn't drive it down here in your hand because it would tear out. So they would drive it through your wrist bones. Okay? Goes through your wrist. Not here, but right kind of there. Right on within where the hand joint's there. Okay? So they'll put that in. Obviously a distance there. They will be very efficient. Okay, once he's pinned on that, then I estimate then, and the reason why the cross was only this high is it would be very difficult to lift somebody and put them on the cross high up in the air. So a lot of the artwork you see of the crucifixion is false because they wouldn't have wasted material on extra timber. They needed something fast and efficient. Chances are these might have just been poles with a normal mortise and tenon joint like this. Okay? But once they nailed you to the cross, you would probably find that you would have 2 soldiers this side and that side, and then they would pick it up. You guys pick it up. Spin it round. And then it would be put up onto the cross like that. And that's why it couldn't be much higher than that, because these are big lads, but you couldn't lift it much higher than that. So this is the kind of size that the cross was. You guys can sit down there. Okay? David, can you stay with me? Kai, can you stay with me? Okay. So he would have hung up here. Put that block over here, Kai. Now with his wrists pinned up there, he would be on the cross like that. Well, I want to try and see what it's like there, but maybe I have to get one of my boys and duct tape them to this thing, and I want to feel what it's like to lift him. I want to feel what that feels like. I want to feel what that feels like, because you would have had to have 2 guys, probably I reckon 4 guys. It would have been with a guy on it to lift that guy up. Then he would have been pinned. Now the pinning of the ankles is interesting. Okay? Again, it's a T-shaped cross. It's called a crux commissa. Again, this is called the patibulum. This is the stipes, all right? And the cross that we often see in art is a crux emissa, often in artwork like that. The problem with that is it's got complicated joinery at the top there. And they wouldn't have wasted their time with that. They had to do this a lot. This is simple and effective and cheap. Okay? So this is probably the most accurate artistic depiction of Christ that I know of, that Dr. Bergeron says is the case. But notice how the feet are pinned. Again, here's the image now of the pinning of the wrists, right through the bones in the wrist here so that it doesn't pull out. They've actually done tests with this. There was a French medical doctor who was a Christian, and he did tests on this by taking cadavers and putting arms, nailing arms, and putting weight in them to see it, because under a certain amount of pressure, it will pull through the nail. How do we know the nails were like this? Because archaeologically, we've discovered bones with the nails still in it. We've got 3 archaeological discoveries of heels nailed. And so we know with good reason where Jesus was nailed. He's often depicted in artwork as being nailed, like in the last one here, you'll see, with the feet in the front. And sometimes there was apparently a little ledge that they had a name for it that they would put his feet on. They wouldn't waste time with that. Not going to waste any time with that. Okay? They need simple and effective. So, how would they then nail them? David, what I want to do is I'm going to get Kai to go around the other side so I can show you how they would nail them. Just move that stuff around to the back and then go stand on the back side there. So this is if it's facing away now. So if you were to stand up facing that way. Okay, David, do you want to come hold here? So you've got to be really, you think about this, if you're doing this, and any kind of manual labor, you've got to be effective with how you do this. So as I've been doing this now, and what would happen is you would take the person's ankles, and then what you would do is you trap his ankle like this. You would you would line his ankle up, trap it with your knee probably like this, just behind on the bottom of his heel here, and then you would just drive it through. Okay, that's how you spin. My boy. And then when you're finished, right, you guys can take a seat. This is probably nailed to the top here because his head probably sat down from his arms. I'm not going to nail it. We made a hole there to make it easier. There we go. In 3 languages, and Pilate had that written there. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's in Latin, in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek, so that people could know what he was up there for. And that's how our Lord was crucified. But they weren't done yet. Since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the others who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness, his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you also may believe. For these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. Yet another scripture says they will look on him whom they've pierced. There you see the references back to the Old Testament. Okay, so the coup de grace was done with a Roman spear. I made a spear yesterday with my boys. They said to me, can we make more of those? You know, okay. So it was, probably the Romans had different kind of spears. They had a pilum, which was a spear that you use like a javelin. But this was more of a thrusting spear for fighting close contact. So he was called a hosta, okay? And so notice this, if Jesus is way up in the air there, you're going to be hard to spear him if he's hanging up there. But the fact is that Jesus was probably looking those who crucified him right in the face. Like his head would have been right here. So his rib cage would have been here. And so the soldier who finished him off would have just driven this through his ribs, through his rib cage into his heart. And that's where we get the flow of water and blood from. Yeah. Now we know that they didn't break his legs. I don't know what they used to break his legs. They probably had a bat, okay? Or maybe just used a hammer. Hammer will do the job. But they broke the other guy's legs, but not Jesus' legs. So if his legs were hanging like this on his shin bone there, I could just come from underneath like that and because your leg is going to be kind of cranked like that, just across the front there. Again, archaeologically, we found bones with that. There's a special term for it. He has the spearing of Jesus, a picture of that through the lung. It would have collapsed his lung if his lungs weren't already in trouble because of the beating. Collapsed his lung, and then he would have bled out a lot. Now, how serious were the Romans about their responsibility? In Roman law, if you fell asleep on duty, they would execute you afterwards. How about that for a work ethic? If you were in charge of crucifying somebody and you didn't crucify them, what did they do to you? You get crucified. So you had to make sure that this job was done. And we know that even from some of the biblical accounts with the people in the book of Acts, for example, this was even true for other places. There's one where the disciples escape, and immediately the doors were open, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. When the jailer woke and he saw the prison open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself. Why would he kill himself? Because he knew that was what was waiting for him if these guys got away. Later on in Acts 27, the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan, and he ordered those who could jump. See, there again, it comes up in other places as well. This is just standard practice. If you were in charge of criminals or people who were in jail and they got away, you got punished really severely. The theories of death. Now, because we don't have a medical examination, we can't tell, but there are two main theories of how Jesus died. This is the one that most of you might have heard of, that Jesus asphyxiated or he suffocated on the cross. So not necessarily that the spear ended him, because the Romans, when they went to look at Jesus, could see that he was dead. That's why they didn't break his legs. Because apparently if you broke the legs of the victim, it would accelerate their death. Okay, maybe, I'm not sure why, maybe just extra bleeding or trauma, okay? But they actually did some experiments on that now and on this kind of thing. And I think that the understanding of suffocation is not right. People have been tortured by hanging. They would do this at Auschwitz and Dachau. They would tie your hands behind your back and tie you up with your hands folded behind your back. And that would usually lead to your death in 3 hours from suffocation, so you couldn't breathe. Okay, so we know of hanging torture that was done in the Second World War, and the doctors knew about this now. You don't have any breathing problems if your arms are stretched out like this. And we also know he wasn't suffocating because he was talking to people. Okay. What killed Jesus was shock and trauma-induced coagulopathy. Okay. What is this? It's when you have been beaten so much and abused so much that it starts to affect your whole body in such a way that your body begins to shut down in a particular kind of way, and it leads to a cascading effect that just cycles back on each other. So you're bleeding out, okay, as a result of a variety of three things, which are a result of this trauma-induced coagulopathy. Now, we know that Jesus, when he arrived at the cross, he was in trouble because he didn't even make it there. And I think he had got such a beating. The other guys didn't get that beating. They made it there. I think the temple guard and the Roman guards did a number on him that he was very close. He didn't last for long. He was buried at 9 in the morning and he was dead by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And Pilate is surprised that he's dead. So crucified at 9, dead at 3. Okay. And so we know this then. So I'm going to close now. And I'm just going to read you the summary of this by Dr. Bergeron because it's so succinct then on closing out this then. It's just really, it's got some technical jargon in it, but it's really, yeah, I had to put this down a few times to finish it. Listen here. Trauma-induced coagulopathy is an ominous potential complication of traumatic hemorrhagic shock and markedly increases the risk of death. The greater the tissue injury, the bleeding, the greater the risk. Acidemia and hypothermia are also triggering factors and common during shock. We know that on the day Jesus was crucified, it was cold. Remember, Peter goes into the temple. He's standing near the fire to warm himself. So it's a cold day. So acidemia plus hypothermia, your blood is not clotting. You're bleeding out. Okay? When tissue injury with bleeding, acidemia, and hypothermia occur simultaneously, they create a positive feedback loop to progressively worsening coagulopathy. This has been called the lethal triad. Trauma-induced coagulopathy is difficult for the physicians to treat in the best modern trauma centers. In Jesus' time, death would be certain and rapid. Jesus suffered an extensive injury and blood loss prior to crucifixion, making him susceptible to shock. Initially, after his unrest, he was on trial before the members of the Jewish ruling tribunal, the Sanhedrin. He was beaten by the temple guard. The Sanhedrin found Jesus guilty of blasphemy, which was punishable by death. By this time, however, the Sanhedrin had lost autonomous authority for capital punishment. Since Jewish executions of criminals were generally not permitted by Roman authorities, it is likely that Jesus received the maximum beating permitted by Hebrew law prior to being delivered by the Roman authorities. So he probably got 39 lashes from the temple guard. Luke's gospel implies that Jesus received a particularly harsh thrashing from the temple guard prior to being sent to Roman authorities. I didn't know that, but the language apparently in the Greek gives that away. Very interesting. After Pontius Pilate ordered Jesus' execution, Roman soldiers again scourged Jesus prior to crucifixion. Unlike Jewish scourging, Romans had no lash limit. Roman scourging was done with a flagellum, a whip comprised of leather strips with a dumbbell-shaped pieces of lead sewn to the ends. You know why it's dumbbell-shaped? Where's that thing? On the Shroud of Turin, on his body, he's got bruises. It's like he's been hit by little small dumbbells. Or what do you think when you swing this around and you've got two little lead balls there next to each other? When that thing hits you, it's going to leave a bruise and another little bruise, just like a dumbbell impression. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that they were using on him. The entire body would be scourged. Romans had known anti-Semitic sentiments which were allowed free and full expression during crucifixion. In Jesus' case, his Roman scourging was most likely particularly brutal. Jesus was executed as a political insurgent, his stated crime being the king of the Jews. Roman soldiers would have viewed this as a defiance against Caesar, increasing their ire. After scourging him, the whole cohort of soldiers gathered to mock him and beat him. Notably, he was struck on the head with the staff, or reed, which they had placed in his hand to mimic a royal scepter. The crown of thorns added to the mockery and caused puncture wounds to the scalp. The severity of Jesus' beatings has medical significance as a precipitating factor for shock. Besides the loss of blood, widespread soft tissue injury is a trigger for developing trauma-induced coagulopathy. The severity of this beating caused diffuse cellular tissue injury to the musculoskeletal system and probably internal organ injury as well. Internal organ injury is suggested by the description of the spear wound to Jesus' chest wall. The appearance of clear fluid from the chest wound indicates that fluid had accumulated around the lungs, pleural effusion. The pleural effusion would have been caused by the beatings of the thorax. So when he got hit on his back with that device, His lungs might have even been separating from inside and collapsing, and fluid around the lungs typically has a clear appearance and would look like water when the spear initially entered the chest. Once the spear ruptured the heart, blood would mix with the fluid in the chest cavity, making the fluid flowing from the chest wound appear to be blood. Since Jesus' beating has caused fluid to accumulate around his lungs, it is plausible to consider that the lungs themselves may have been injured, namely pulmonary contusion and traumatic wet lung. Appears to have been a weakened condition beyond what is typical for crucifixion victims. One of Jesus' last statements on the cross is, "I am thirsty." It can be assumed that Jesus was denied anything to drink after his arrest. However, the thirst experience and shock exceeds the typical experience of thirst. I'm done. Wow. Thank you, Jesus, for doing that for me. Phew. Makes communion different, doesn't it? Yeah. So, I close my computer there as well. Yeah, sure. It's brutal. This is the centerpiece of the Christian faith, the first half of the centerpiece. It's the crucifixion. This is the event around which the world will hinge. You ought to know something about it. If it doesn't affect your soul, I'm not sure if I can help you. I pray that God will change your heart from stone to flesh. I pray that you would respond to the good news that the Savior has come, because he has the awesome thing. It's not the end of the story. It's not the end. Now you can begin to understand why on Sunday we're going to come here with great enthusiasm. Okay? If this is the end of the story, what else is there left to do but just weep? Because that's all there is in the world, and that's all the world has to offer. Is it's the end. It's death for every man. Some just go like this, others go another way. But Christianity does not declare that. The story is not finished. The disciples thought it was finished, but not in the way that Jesus said it was finished. There's two kinds of "it is finished" there. The one in their minds was a misunderstanding of who Jesus was in his ministry. But this is the great hope of the world, folks. This is the greatest story ever told, and it's true. And that if you commit your life to this, your life ought to be different. That the God who did this for you, who's going to climb off that cross, climb out of that grave, is pursuing you and has something for you, for every single one of you. He's prepared good works for you. Ephesians 2:10. So my challenge to you as you reflect on today's sermon is to reflect upon your own life. What are you busy with? What are you up to? Is it of eternal consequences? Is it about the work of the Lord, or are you just trying to make a name for yourself, or, be comfortable? Whatever that is. Hopefully not. That's not the way of Christ. What did he say? Take up your? Ooh. Now you know something about that. That's not a comfortable thing to take up, folks. You're all going to have troubles. You're all going to have problems. Be rest assured, it's coming. But if you know Christ, it's okay. And that's the difference. It's the knowing Christ. It's knowing the Messiah, who he was, how he was promised in the Old Testament, how he fulfilled all those verses. We saw constant reference. There is no New Testament without the Old Testament. There is no Messiah. There is no hope of salvation. The foundation of all of the good news of the Lord is in the Old Testament, in the promises of God. Know it. It will change your life. And all the world will be subject to the truth of those claims. All right. I'm going to close in a word of prayer.